Memphis. I'm one of Dr. Johnson's henchmen here with the University of Memphis, and we've got four great presentations for you in this panel. Um, so we're going to get right to it because we do have four, and we want to use our time well. So let me introduce to you uh, Miss Tiffany Petty Gilliam. Tiffany is a PhD student at Duquesne University, and she is a board member at the Media Ecology Association. And she's going to present to us The Unquantifiable Soul, a phenomenological investigation regarding the weights and measures of human worth. So take it away, Tiffany.
Hello, hi. I woke up this morning without a voice and I taught two classes and wrote on the board the whole time. I was straight Ariel. I was like, I'm not gonna not talk at this thing. So I've been saving up this loud mouth for you guys. So I hope that you enjoy. I am from Duquesne, which is the only lie that Jeff told. You pronounce it Duquesne formally. It is a very confusing word, so I don't
Yeah, I
disagree with
knew
it.
that too. I'm so sorry. That's so dumb of me.
That's okay. We're all nervous. That's totally fine. Okay, to state again, you guys are going to take a journey with me. I happened to be in a rhetoric, race, and religion class at Duquesne last fall, and I was in for way more than I thought. So, the title of the paper I wrote based on the class is The Unquantifiable Soul, a Phenomenological Investigation Regarding the Weights and Measures of Human Worth. I am so grateful to be invited to this conversation, to this opportunity. Thank you, Jackie, for inviting me, also from Duquesne. I am not worthy of the treasures of wisdom and knowledge that I have received all day. So I'm so grateful. Thank you. So the paper starts with a little personal connection. I love the hymn "O Holy Night." I assume that you guys know about it. It kind of goes back. I love it because that line where it says, "Till he appeared and the soul felt its worth." The soul felt its worth. For years, that has just hit me because I am so grateful for the truth of the gospel. And like, there's no worth without when he appears and the soul felt its worth, like he has to appear for the soul to know it matters and it has purpose and it has intention. So with that in my, subliminal mind, I start the class in month one. So Professor Griggs created a really safe environment for complex, hard discussions, all different kinds of people in the class. And I felt so safe and like willing. I was like, okay, I'll present first. I'll present the first book. Just so happened to be The Cross and the Lynching Tree by Cone. And I was like, oh my goodness, I am not the person for this. So I'm from Texas and I'm sitting out in Tyler, Texas on my city square. I live in that neighborhood. Like that's my hood. Everybody knows me. I know everyone. So I'm just reading casually outside The Cross and the Lynching Tree. And my friend Micah walks back and he's this Caribbean guy. He is a great dancer and I can only keep up with him. I'm Puerto Rican enough to be able to keep up with him, but we have this like a fun little relationship. And he like sees me reading this and he's like, why are you reading about lynching? I would never read that. Micah said, like, I would never read that. And I was like, oh, okay. So from the beginning, Micah kind of pops in through the entire semester. As I keep reading books, he keeps checking in. We keep having conversations, and his perspective of all this just leveled up the class experience. It was amazing. So his ongoing reflections just help give life to the course material outside of the classroom and made me feel a little bit safer because I felt so out of pocket, but I do know Micah. So then the second month, we just deepen our understanding of race and theology beyond the cross and the lynching tree. We read Massengale's Racial Justice in the Catholic Church. We talked about how racial justice is central to understanding Christ's message, which makes a lot of sense for people to think about it, not people like me who had never thought about it, that was now grateful to think about it. And during this time, I was in the restaurant that Michael works at. He's a chef. And I noticed a white couple leave the restaurant. And I saw from across the room them say goodbye to everyone. Everyone say goodbye back. Micah is the only Black employee at the restaurant. And I watched them ignore him. And he was the only person they didn't acknowledge. I reiterate, I live in East Texas. The high school I went to was called Robert E. Lee High School. It has since been demolished and renamed, but not until 2023. So I noticed. And afterward, I came up to him and asked him about that. And he was like, oh, that's not a big deal. That happens all the time. That's just like quiet, covert, like normalized racism in East Texas. And I wouldn't have paid attention had I not been in the class. So that experience happened, and the months go on, and we talk about, we read Patel's We Need to Build, focusing on pluralism and diversity and collective action in building a just society. Cohn reinforced the idea that liberation is not just personal, but involves the collective healing of communities. So through Micah, I saw that racial identity isn't as monolithic and obvious as, a simple person like me would assume because he's actually Caribbean. He's not a Black American. And he said during that time, like, I'm not who they think I am. They're just not asking. Like this assumption of like, well, he's just that, he's just whatever. They were wrong in assuming his identity, but they treated him as though they were right about who he was. And then we move on to my final reflections in the last month of the class. My interpretation of Oh Holy Night completely changed because I went back to it. And did you know there's like a million more chapters to or verses to that song? And in one of them, far down, maybe the third or fourth verse, it says, "The slave is my brother." I was like, no way. This has been here the entire time, which is such an example of my ignorance, like the entire time. There's this whole experience, this whole history that I just wasn't aware of. So, through that, through the readings, through these understandings, the worth of the soul, as understood in all these class readings, is not just about individual salvation. The slave is my brother. It's about just breaking chains of racial oppression. It's an everybody thing. Like it doesn't matter what makes you uncomfortable. It's an everybody thing. I'm sorry to cough. Wait, this is what I can do. So the readings during the class, like Jones is White Too Long, McClendon and Ferguson's African American Philosophers, expanded my understanding of race, religion, and collective identity. Cohn's reflections on the lynching tree, like back at the beginning, showed how systemic oppression and personal salvation intertwine. Isn't that lovely? Like the cross as a comparison to being, lynching. Like slaves saw hope in that when they made that comparison. And that's something I never knew or understood before. So this realization with the hymn and the slave is my brother, it finally hit home. It's been a part of the conversation all along, a call for collective justice and liberation. So the hymn's message now resonated on a deeper level with me. Faith and salvation are not just about individual redemption, like, oh, God loves me and I get to go to heaven now. It is about freeing everyone in every way from every kind of oppression. And I could really get down with that. So in the end, Micah's asked me one more question, posed with a smile. He's so charming and compelling. It just reminded me of his influence, his positive influence through this class throughout the semester. He just said, am I going to be in your paper? Did I do it? Am I going to be a part of it? And in that moment, I realized the biggest implication of it all, the stories that we tell and the questions that we ask and the relationships that we are willing to build are all an opportunity to give life to the lessons taught, throughout just this one class, but probably throughout all of our experience. And now he has a whole new bit, Micah does, and he feels very proud because we wrote a paper together, Micah and I. And now his running line is, well, have you seen my scholarship? But I'm just so proud. And for the larger implications, it kind of speaks to all of us, a soul's worth. It recognizes that God sees each of us, each one of our souls, exactly where they are, exactly as they should have been all along, as we've been previously discussing, in every context that we find ourselves. So he meets us there. He affirms our dignity, like previously discussed. He declares our worth, and then confirms the freedom that we kind of already had. So thank you for your patience. Ultimately, the worth of the soul is not just about individual salvation, it's about collective liberation. It's about recognizing the chains of injustice and racism and inequality, those chains that are meant to be broken. They're not like forever chains, they're temporary. The power of Christ came not only to heal individual souls, but to also unite them together with each other through the transformative power of the gospel. That's just the greatest unifier that ever exists. And lately I've been on a kick because in my younger mind, I just thought like, God's so creative. Have you seen mountains? Like, have you seen these like beautiful natural wonders? And now I'm like, God's so creative. Have you seen us? Have you seen how who he pairs with who? And when people meet other people, like you guys all have your stories. I bet you can think of 5 to 10 people that you never knew, and then you met them at the exact right time, and they changed your life in the exact right way, and they felt the same. Like that is God's creativity. Like that is God's purpose, and that's God's intention. So. I'm about that right now. And then I have all these books. I'm sure I have a list of books for whoever wants them. It's like 10 to 12 that we read for the class. Um, all in all, I was very grateful for this opportunity, very grateful to go through the hard process of learning a hard thing in a very safe place. And Duquesne offered that to me. And then Micah was the cherry on top. And now I'm in this conversation. I'm grateful for that too. I just think that's a gift from God.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Oh, goodness. What a wonderful start to this panel. All right. Well, I don't know. I'm deliberating whether I want to make it my tradition now to have an idiotic mispronunciation of everybody's institution. Um, you know, just to even things out everywhere. But I'm going to try to hold back from that and make Duquesne my one major flub this afternoon. Next up, we have Reverend Dr. E. Michelle Letter, and she's going to be presenting to us Do You Condemn Hamas? How Linguistic Terrorism Attempts to Corrupt Potential Resistance. Welcome, Reverend Dr. Letter.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Greetings to you. Thank you to the Center for the Study of Rhetoric, Race, and Religion for your first virtual conference, and to Dr. Andre Johnson for inviting me to be part of the same. I'm so grateful. The question, do you condemn Hamas, may seem on its surface a simple question. In response to the Hamas-led military attack on October 7, 2023, political and poly-entertainment pundits jumped on the chance to flood their interview schedule with those who agreed with Israel's narrative and eventually those who did not. As the number of public responses grew in protest of Israel's occupation of Palestine and its oppression of Palestinians, especially in Gaza, interview rhetoric shifted to counter it. In an attempt to catch anyone interrupting Israel's narrative flat-footed, some reporters and analysts began asking, but do you condemn Hamas? And at first it worked. Viewers watched as guests flailed around attempting to figure out on the fly how to hold Israel accountable for its 3/4 of a century-long rampage against the land and people of Palestine and account for civilian deaths. But that wasn't all. What was happening, especially in its first usage, was not simply a clash of narratives or a match of wits. Rather, the question served as a linguistic weapon to shut down resistance to an oppressive force. Do you condemn Hamas is meant to uphold not only the narrative of the Zionist project, but to intimidate others from any attempt at resisting it. The question was never meant to expose difference of political stance. In fact, just the opposite. As a form of linguistic terrorism, the question, do you condemn Hamas, was crafted to impose the militaristic weight of Zionist imperialism upon any and all who dared challenge it. I recognize dialogue seizing similarities with religious language used by those who insist their interpretation is the only correct, faithful, even righteous one, and demand others accept the same. Who among us has heard someone in a sacred scripture study attempt to bring dialogue to a screeching halt by saying, as we all know, the Bible says, ... Or, I just believe what the Bible says. Or, God's word is clear to those with ears to hear. On the surface, these phrases indicate their authors believe and want to connect their arguments to a divine moral standard. Yet the outcome of using these phrases often shuts down opposition by linguistic force seemingly sanctioned by the hand of God. Though the immediate consequences are much different than those who are standing in solidarity with military forces resisting their oppressors, The mechanics are the same. Words weaponized to shut down potential interruption of a carefully crafted and intensely protected narrative. In this paper, I'm defining linguistic terrorism as the weaponization of words, phrases, and wording to manipulate people and circumstances such that dialogue and resistance in any of its forms are shut down with the use of fear. I'll say that one more time. Excuse me. I'm defining linguistic terrorism as the weaponization of words, phrases, and wording to manipulate people and circumstances such that dialogue and resistance in any of its forms are shut down with the use of fear. In the sacred scripture study, the fear of being excluded from the Christian family, or worse, by God, is exploited by weaponizing the Bible, its interpretation, and the ability to discern truth with spiritual maturity. In the weaponized interviews, the fear of condoning violence towards civilians and innocents is exploited by forcing the question, do you condemn Hamas, to carry the ideology, narrative, and promotion of Zionism to the exclusion of any resistance to it. One reason people, communities, and even nations use linguistic terrorism is because it works. Even when its staying power is limited, it often works long enough to stall until the next strategy can be constructed. For today, I'd like to lift up how thinking in terms of systems can not only help us recognize how linguistic terrorism functions, but also how we could resist it. After doing so, the final section of this paper will focus on examples of how religious language succumbs to, uses, but also has the power to dismantle linguistic terrorism. The power of language exists within the logic and linguistic systems which utilize it. In other words, within a particular logic or linguistic system, everything, quote, makes sense, fits, or works together for the sustainability and protection of the system itself. In a Wittgensteinian way, it matters not that logic or wording works outside of its system, but only that it works within it. For example, those of us who are white can be heard saying both implicitly and out loud that the evidence we most easily believe is that which we can see with our own eyes. Yet there is abundant social media evidence alone that when we watch videos of racialized terror, especially against Black and Indigenous people, our responses are overpopulated with, but what about? Or if they had only, and excuses made on behalf of officers who commit police murder. We bend over backwards with linguistic and moral gymnastics for the purpose of protecting logic and linguistic systems which fit our anti-Black prejudices and racist assumptions. In other words, what we see with our eyes doesn't, quote, work within the logic system of racism, so we adjust our linguistics to match, despite our proclamations of the power of visual evidence to convince us otherwise. Within the logic system of Zionism, the question of do you condemn Hamas functions to protect Israel's innocence despite the long laundry list of atrocities carried out against the land and people of Palestine and now connecting Arab states as well. It serves also to protect the proclaimed truthfulness of the narrative it has created to propagate an intrinsic connection between Judaism and Zionism, Israel as victim, and any counter-narrative as anti-Semitic. Palestinian and pro-Palestinian authors and activists have been saying this all along, but their words are often ignored, erased, or weaponized by feeding on anti-Arab prejudice exacerbated by and since 9/11. A few recent examples include the book Except for Palestine, The Limits of Progressive Politics, authored by scholar and political analyst Mark Lamont Hill and Israel-Palestine expert Mitchell Plitnick, who amplify how people who advocate for any number of liberative stances withhold the same for Palestine. Though best-selling author Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, The Message, still ranks at the top of sales lists, the critique and rebuke of including his analysis on Palestine were sharp and swift. National interview clips flooded the airwaves and social media pages highlighting Mr. Coates having to respond to questions not about the book's premise, but those assuming and asserting anti-Semitism and victim blaming. And now, most recently, the abduction and disappearing of Mahmoud Khalil, a pro-Palestinian activist legally in the United States with a green card and married to a United States citizen, has set off a linguistic tug of war between those who connect all pro-Palestinian protests with, quote, support for Hamas, and those who recognize freedom of speech only applies to those who obey the current administration's whims. However, linguistic terrorism is not restricted to primarily political realms or colonial projects. Because of the power of religious language, the jump from religious proclamation to religious propaganda is easy to make by those whose relationship to power is driven only by utilitarian precision. Perhaps some, like I do, consider the influence of religious language at a sacramental level, where God selects mundane objects, imbibes them with divine power, and releases them into the world under the agency of those who experience them. I am asserting that religious language taps into something other than ourselves with the power to address our highest needs, hopes, and desires. And depending on our relationship with power of our own linguistic systems, language succumbs to or has the power to highlight one example of each. One way religious language succumbs to linguistic terrorism is by compromising its own logic and linguistic system as it cowers before empire. In these circumstances, religious language tries so hard to accommodate empire, it acquiesces a logic and linguistic system not of its own. Having attempted to be palatable to empire, it compromises its rituals, its definitions, and its power by contorting itself beyond recognition. Religious language might retain its wording, but it surrenders divine liberative power that now lies dormant there. For example, Philippians 2:5-8 reads thus, "Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, assuming human likeness, and being found in the appearance as human, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." Within a liberative logic and linguistic system, these words can call us into correction should we overinflate ourselves, remembering that Christ Jesus, who existed in the form of God, might have had reason to, but does not. Instead, Jesus humbles himself and continues to obey a divine worldview that would eventually get him lynched by the state. Within the logic and linguistic system of empire, these same words have been used to punitively manipulate direct targets of oppression into thinking God commands them to an inhumane humility, conscripting them to compliance with an empire happy to kill them. When religious language compromises its logic and linguistic system for that of the empire, it does the empire's work for them. Sometimes, however, religious language takes as its own the logic and linguistic system of empire. In these circumstances, religious language seeks no reason to accommodate the empire because those who use it see themselves as empire. Religious language is utilized to promote, sustain, and protect empire as a form of self-preservation. Religious language, now fully entangled within the logic and linguistic system of empire, can no longer recognize it as other than itself. Empire and religious language are one, and any resistance is recognized as both apostasy and treason. For example, let's consider the term nonviolence. Within a liberative logic and linguistic system, the term, phenomenon, and strategy of nonviolence can catalyze the development of communities for which humane and creation-respecting relationships grow in trust, respect, and peace. When religious language is utilized by those who fully identify as empire, nonviolence is used to force unquestioning obedience, anesthetize critical thinking, and suppress rebellion in any form. As Frantz Fanon is well known for amplifying, the oppressor only cares about and demands nonviolence at the very moment direct targets of oppression are poised to resist. When religious language uses the logic and linguistic system of the empire, it becomes the empire. However, as the whispers, shouts, and screams of freedom have proclaimed throughout history, this is not all that there is. I am claiming religious language intrinsically possesses the capability to harness its power to dismantle linguistic terrorism when it re-members its divine logic and language system. In these circumstances, religious language refuses to be corralled nor incarcerated by empire's logic and linguistic system, following only the rules within its own. This requires its users to remember how divine dreams of true shalom refuse to expend justice for vapid hallmark versions of love or cheap versions of grace Nazis demanded during the Third Reich. Instead, religious language in these cases can stand up against those very things, not only to resist, but to replace empire with a kingdom worthy of the one who imagined it and creation who will thrive within it. For example, in Exodus 1, when the midwives Shiphrah and Puah are commanded by the king of Egypt to kill the sons of Hebrew women, they instead disobeyed the direct order because they, quote, feared God. What's important here is not the specific description of what it meant for them to fear God, but instead that it signals a shift in the logic and linguistic system from empire to that of their God. After hearing the king's direct order to kill the baby boys, instead of choosing from possible options within the empire's logic and linguistic systems, the midwives instead choose from those within God's logic and linguistic systems. The language of empire cannot contain the options nor the religious language capable of resisting it. Thus, the midwives go on to save all the Hebrew babies by refusing the order and even lying directly to the king's face. When religious language re-members its own logic and language system, linguistic terrorism can be dismantled and at times its consequences averted. The question, do you condemn Hamas, is only a dead end when considered within the logic and language system of empire. And while religious language isn't the only form of resistance capable of interrupting and dismantling the linguistic terror the question is meant to enact, its sacramental power lives latent within its own logic and linguistic system, ready to resist and replace empire when we remember it as our own. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Very loud clapping. I know everyone's on mute, but dadgum, she deserves like a riot.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
No question about it. Excellent. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Letter. I don't believe I fully introduced Dr. Letter. She is with Metropolitan AME Church. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Letter. Next, we have Ridita Mizan from Illinois State University. I hope that I am pronouncing your name correctly, Ridita. And she is bringing to us far-right rhetoric, race and religion, the politics of identity in Bangladesh.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for having me. I'd like to share my screen, please. Will that be possible?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. You should see a little. You should see a little share at the bottom
Yes, go.
of the icon bar.
Can you see the screen now?
It's coming, I think.
Okay.
There it is.
Great, thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm quite new to rhetoric. I am a PhD student in English at Illinois State University. I'm also an international student, which is why I'm drawing from my experience to understand the intersections of English studies as well as race and religion and how it has interfered with the process of my understanding of English. I'm a student of literature and culture. In my educational experience, it was quite colonial, and I was restricted to study the canonical texts only. And now that I'm thinking about my own experiences and learning to see how people use autoethnography to use their own stories to not just place themselves within the story, but also to engage meaningfully with culture and society, I'm trying to engage with interdisciplinary work involving rhetoric as well as linguistics, which was not my primary mode of research so far, which I have done in Bangladesh, and I have done my master's from England. All right, so today I will be discussing the globalization of far-right rhetoric and how identity politics are strategically manipulated to consolidate power. this is my abstract, and I have tried to include some ideas that are connecting the dots in terms of the global and local politics as they are unfolding. While the far right movements are often associated with Western contexts, my talk will highlight how these same exclusionary strategies operate globally, using Bangladesh as a case study. Drawing from critical race theory, post-colonial analysis, and global far-right studies, I will explore how religious nationalism, racialized exclusion, and geopolitical shifts reinforce far-right politics across different regions. To introduce the ideas that I have tried to research for this paper, far-right rhetoric is increasingly recognized as a global phenomenon rather than a political development confined to the West. While early studies on the far right largely centered on Western Europe and North America, contemporary research highlights its proliferation across diverse regions, including Latin America, Asia, and Africa. This shift in focus does not imply that far-right rhetoric was previously exclusive to the West, but rather acknowledges that scholarly discourse and comparative research have expanded to capture its global dimensions and how it's affecting different movements. As Dijon et al. Explain, and I quote, the far right today may be viewed as a part of a broader worldwide wave of a new authoritarianism that began to rise after the end of the Cold War and has accelerated during the era of global economic crisis. The pandemic has further created fertile ground for the global rise of the far right by facilitating anti-globalization, anti-elite/expert sentiments, and anti-protectionist measures. This new wave of the far right encompasses a variety of illiberal, ethno-nationalist, reactionary, anti-feminist, alt-right, pan-Christian, neo-fascist, and even pro-Nazi configurations. End quote. This highlights how far-right rhetoric is not only spreading across different geopolitical contexts, but is also adapting to regional, social, economic, and political conditions. Recent scholarship emphasizes the importance of deprovincializing studies of the far right, moving beyond Eurocentric frameworks to understand how it manifests across varying political, economic, and cultural contexts. The spread of far right ideology is facilitated by transnational networks, shared rhetorical strategies, and the strategic adaptation of nationalist, exclusionary, and authoritarian narratives to local conditions, which are appropriated for leveraging the rhetoric itself. This research trajectory underscores the necessity of examining how global power structures, economic anxieties, and identity politics contribute to the resurgence of far-right rhetoric on an international scale. Far-right rhetoric, then, is a political discourse characterized by exclusionary nationalism, authoritarianism, and a rejection of pluralism. It often centers on constructing a pure in-group, typically defined along racial, religious, or cultural lines, while portraying outgroups as existential threats to justify restrictive or repressive measures. And I apologize if I'm repeating things that you all already know very well. According to Dijon et al.'s study, far-right actors globally share nativist positions and employ anti-elite or expert sentiments, which is tricky because I understand the importance of critiquing elitist and exclusionary politics. But when it is leveraged and weaponized, then it can become a problem, which I will be illustrating through my analysis of the Bangladesh context. However, these rhetorical strategies, therefore, are not uniform. They adapt to local political, economic, and cultural contexts. In Western Europe and North America, far-right rhetoric frequently manifests as anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim discourse, while in South Asia, it may frame Hindus or Western powers as external threats to national identity, which is happening in Bangladesh currently. There are some important grounds which should be acknowledged because Bangladesh has been a colony of the British India, and then it has also been under the influence of other larger superpowers of the world. But then again, when it's leveraged for anti-humanitarian reasons, for political purposes, then it beats the meaning itself. So these rhetorical strategies are not uniform. They adapt to local and political contexts. While in South Asia, it may frame Western discourse as the enemy, it also borrows from it to leverage its own politics. So far-right actors are borrowing from the rhetoric from elsewhere when it suits and serves their purposes. The invocation of religious nationalism in places like Bangladesh mirrors patterns seen in far-right movement elsewhere, where appeals to cultural homogeneity and historical grievances reinforce exclusionary politics. As scholars emphasize, defining the far right requires a comparative and global lens, recognizing both its ideological coherence and its adaptability across different regions. So I have tried to understand and define far right rhetoric in terms of exclusionary nationalism and authoritarianism, as well as its global adaptation, as I just discussed. I've also drawn from intersectionality of oppression and ideas related to Orientalism and the framing of the other and how it changes due to the politics and due to the localization of the politics. Moving on, let me quickly discuss the global far-right network a little bit. So Western far-right movements have long framed Islam as an existential threat, leveraging anti-Muslim rhetoric to justify exclusionary politics, securitization, and nationalist agenda, which actually demonstrate the working definition that I'm trying to draw from here. So this discourse, deeply embedded in Western media, politics, and public narratives, construct Islam and Muslim communities as antithetical to Western values, often portraying them as threats to security, culture, and social cohesion. Nafar and colleagues have highlighted in their research that media coverage of right-wing terrorism frequently amplifies negative attitudes towards Muslim. This framing is heightened by selective media representation, where acts of violence committed by Muslim perpetrators receive disproportionately higher coverage than those perpetrated by far-right extremists. This has also been studied time and again. The rise of anti-Muslim conspiracy theories, such as the Great Replacement and Eurabia, has been instrumental in shaping far-right narratives, depicting Muslim immigration as a demographic and cultural threat. And I'm drawing from Bakali's research here. The framing of Islam as a threat is thus a core component of far-right mobilization in the West, serving as a rallying point for nationalist, xenophobic, and exclusionary politics. However, as scholarship increasingly highlights, this rhetoric is not limited to Western contexts. Similar exclusionary strategies are employed globally, reinforcing hierarchical power structures through racial, religious, and cultural divisions. Far-right rhetoric in Bangladesh, much like in Western contexts, is deeply entangled with exclusionary identity politics, but it takes on distinct characteristics shaped by the country's historical, religious, and economic conditions. While far-right movements in the West often frame Islam as a civilization threat, in Bangladesh, a Muslim-majority country, similar exclusionary narratives operate to reinforce internal hierarchies along caste, class, and religious lines. And I will not go into the details of it, but there are too many things that are relevant here, which feeds into the idea of racialization of the Bangladeshi Muslim identity. Historically, religious conversions in Bengal were significantly influenced by caste-based social mobility, and there are some important research that has been done in this context. The financial power of Saudi-backed network has also reshaped religious discourses in Bangladesh, diminishing the influence of historically pluralistic Sufi traditions in favor of more rigid exclusionary representation and interpretations. At the same time, neoliberal and neocolonial economic policies have heightened social stratification, allowing political elites to manipulate religious identity for political gain. This dynamic has reinforced religious nationalism, deepening caste and class-based exclusions under the guise of Islamic unity. Thus, far-right rhetoric in Bangladesh, while differing from its Western counterparts, similarly instrumentalizes and weaponizes identity politics to consolidate power and marginalize dissenting voices. A little bit about the 2025 context of Bangladesh and the relation of the US and Bangladesh. In early 2025, the Trump administration suspended US foreign aid to Bangladesh, leading to the cessation of US aid operation in the country. As reported by a leading newspaper, New Age Bangladesh, USAID's abrupt suspension left ongoing development projects in limbo, significantly impacting economic and humanitarian initiatives. This decision forced Bangladesh to reconsider its diplomatic and economic alignments, particularly as China stepped in to fill the void. According to Al Jazeera, China has been expanding its influence in South Asia, leveraging the reduction of US aid as an opportunity to strengthen its Belt and Road Initiative ties with Bangladesh and other regional partners. Beyond economic concerns, this shift has wider geopolitical implications. As noted in news reports and opinion analysis, Bangladesh now finds itself treading a diplomatic tightrope, navigating between US pressure, Indian regional interests, and China's growing influences. So because of this regional geographical and geopolitical tensions, Bangladesh and the country's racialization of people is taking a very interesting and tricky turn. The suspension of US aid rather than isolating Bangladesh has instead pushed the country further into China's strategic orbit, illustrating how reductions in Western aid can often backfire by strengthening geopolitical rivals and authoritarian regimes as well. In February 2025, during a joint press conference with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, US President Trump addressed concerns about alleged US involvement in Bangladesh's internal affairs. He stated, "I will leave Bangladesh to the Prime Minister Modi," he implied, signaling a potential shift in regional dynamics. This remark has been interpreted by some analysts as indication of the US delegating influence over Bangladesh to India, raising concerns about Bangladesh's sovereignty and the extent of India's involvement in its domestic matters. Former US diplomat John Danilovic suggested that Trump's comment might reflect a reluctance to engage directly with Bangladesh's issue, effectively deferring to India's leadership to the region. This development underscores the intricate balance of power in South Asia and the potential implications for Bangladesh's autonomy in its foreign and domestic policies, which affects the racialization process of Bangladeshi people or Bangladeshi Muslim for that matter. In this case, the reinforcement of India's regional dominance mirrors the exclusionary nationalistic rhetoric of far-right movements worldwide, where majoritarian politics are used to sideline marginalized groups and dissenting voices. Within Bangladesh, these external geopolitical shifts deepen internal caste, class, and religious hierarchies as ruling elites capitalize on nationalist narratives to maintain control. By invoking religious nationalism, promoting racialized exclusion, and suppressing political oppression, Bangladesh's political leadership mirrors far-right strategies observed in Western contexts, although they critique neocolonial and neoliberal shifts oftentimes, but they still borrow from it. I will move on to talk a little bit about the 2024 student uprising in Bangladesh. In 2024, student uprising in Bangladesh began as a protest against the reinstatement of a controversial quota system in government jobs, but quickly evolved into a larger movement demanding justice and an end to an authoritarian rule. Throughout the protest, religious identity was weaponized to discredit demonstrators. Former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina had labeled the students as Razakars, equating them with traitors and Islamist extremists, just like it happens in Western media. A tactic meant to erode public sympathy, but it backfired later on. So after Sheikh Hasina's fall, retaliatory violence against Hindu and Ahmadiyya communities illustrated how both state and political opportunists manipulated religious narratives and racialized identity discourse for their own end. The uprising highlighted not only the limits of authoritarian control, but also the power of mass mobilization, showing that youth activism remains a formidable force for change in Bangladesh. However, the scars left by state violence communal tensions, and the manipulation of religious identity underscore the ongoing struggle for justice and reform in the country. I'd like to conclude by drawing a little bit from the theoretical insights. Far-right rhetoric is not an isolated or region-specific phenomenon. Rather, it is a global strategy that manipulates identity to consolidate power and sustain exclusionary hierarchies and reinforce nationalist agendas. And I'm trying to understand it borrowing from Amartya Sen's Identity and Violence, which illustrates the danger of singular identities. So this, along with Edward Said's theory of Orientalism, helps explain how dominant political actors frame internal dissent as an external or foreign threat, paralleling how the West has long positioned Islam as a civilization enemy. Meanwhile, drawing from Spivak's concept of strategic essentialism, it can be said that the way religious nationalism in Bangladesh is deployed to homogenize identity, silencing alternative narratives, it reminds us that identities are fluid and always contested, which is oftentimes weaponized to determine which is Western and which is local and native. And the rhetoric of it is blurred out because of because people want to, political actors want to leverage on it. To conclude, as DeJonge and colleagues have argued that far-right rhetoric adapts to local political and cultural contexts while maintaining an overarching global ideological framework, Bangladesh's internal struggles reflect a microcosm of these broader global trends. The use of religious identity to suppress student movements, reinforce caste and class divisions, and delegitimize opposition mirrors far-right strategies worldwide, from anti-immigration politics in Europe to Hindutva nationalism in India. As Amartya Sen critiques in Identity and Violence, the Elation of Destiny, far-right rhetoric thrives on reducing individuals to a singular identity, erasing the complexities of belonging and reinforcing exclusionary categories that serve political interests. In Bangladesh, political elites construct a rigid Islamic nationalist identity, branding critiques as traitors or outsiders, much like how far-right movements globally use race, religion, and cultural nationalism to justify exclusion. This reveals a deeply interconnected system of far-right politics, where the manipulation of identity does not operate in isolation, but functions within a transnational web of power, exclusion, and authoritarian control. Understanding these dynamics is essential not only to resisting far-right rhetoric in individual nations, but also to recognizing how its global structures shape identity politics and governance across the world. Thank you very much. And these are some of the works that I have drawn from. And I will stop sharing.
Ridita, thanks so much. I would echo so many of the comments in the chat that it's so helpful to see how so much of what we're seeing fits in with a global phenomenon. Thank you so much for your work and your presentation. Last and certainly not least, we'd like to welcome Anthony Joseph, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Luchini.
Luchini.
Luchini. Thank you very much. Also from Duquesne University, which I have learned once again to say correctly. He is going to bring to us at home in the Nursery of Ideas the role of empathy, forgiveness, and dialogue in healing racial injustice. So welcome, Anthony. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. So thank you. I'll just jump right in here. The word seminar has its origins in the Latin seminarium, meaning plant nursery or seed plot, from seminarius of seeds. Figuratively, it is a breeding ground wherein seeds are sowed, watered, and allowed to grow. The growing of a seed is a perilous endeavor indeed, rife with turmoil and subject to inhospitable conditions which threaten its prosperity. The nursery or plot allows for a designated area where seeds may grow unfettered by the apathetic and vindictive forces of the outside world. The plot provides security for a community of growing seeds, while the nursery itself provides sustenance and support in the process of growth. Holding true to its nature, this educational seminar provides a designated space for a community of learners to change, grow, and become. Buffered from a reactionary outside world, the classroom serves as a plot in time and space where penetrating and at times uncomfortable questions can be asked, turned over, and discussed to their at times bitter ends. Within that seminar, healing took place. Education, driven by the voices of many and necessitated by centuries of suffering, happened to the heart as well as to the mind, and wisdom watered those seeds for a new day of understanding, compassion, and growth. It is this paper's contention that education, when intentionally designed to engage with racial injustice, has the potential to heal both individual and communities by fostering empathy, promoting critical consciousness, and cultivating space for restorative dialogue to challenge systematic racism. Today, an educational seminar commonly refers to a discussion-based course with smaller than usual enrollment cap designed to maximize participation from all class members. Recently, this writer had the opportunity to participate in a graduate level seminar entitled Race, Rhetoric, and Religion. There were 2 instructors for the course and a class size of approximately 16 students, roughly a quarter of which attended virtually. The classroom where we met, affectionately referred to as a broom closet by some, featured a series of tables arranged as a square with a couch on one side and chairs along the rest. As such, there was a large open area in the middle majority of the room and not much space anywhere else. Surrounded by windowless walls and obligatory educational technology, students and professors sat shoulder to shoulder along the outside of the square. As dedicated as those professors were, as impressive as the studentship was, as engaging as the content and conversation proved to be, as comfortable as that couch was, and as necessary as the technology was for integrating the virtual students, there was perhaps no greater asset to this seminar than that open space in the middle of the room where no one sat and nothing much happened. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Through a series of shared rituals, traditions, and symbols of space, a sacred community is formed where meaning, orientation, and understanding can be accessed. Crossing back over that sacred threshold to re-enter into the profane world is an inevitable reality. The space is but a microcosm of the divine and not a sustainable abode for the living. The process is not unlike this time and space created by Mircea Eliade within the empty space of the educational seminar. The divine wisdom of seeing is at the heart of education and the root of restorative conversation. The space within the classroom is set aside from normality and therefore from normalized, perhaps reactionary societal response. While it is inevitable that each class session must end and the room must clear, the wisdom gained from that time and space of learning becomes the responsibility of the learner to carry with them. We incubate and wizen and then Johnny Appleseed that wisdom once we separate and step back into Eliade's profane world of the everyday. This is the nursery, the sacred space of learning wherein flowers grow. And it is particularly impactful when the conversation centers around topics often treated as hostile by the profane world. We opened our class in race, rhetoric, and religion by identifying our names and interests. But we also voiced and explored our individual tensions with race and religion. We developed a swell of voices and stories, many of which remain active in my imagination and integral to my understanding of my peers. I realized after 3 or 4 presenters that unlike routine classroom introduction sessions, this was not a tedious activity meant to be sat through on the way to content. Indeed, this was the content. We were the content. Our differing religious backgrounds, our various histories with racial tensions, and the troubling yet revealing quilt that those different narratives wove was the content of our class. Academic exploration would eventually deepen our understanding, but to remove the lived experience from these topics would be like placing a deflated whoopee cushion in a teacher's chair. It wouldn't have the oomph, and it wouldn't resonate in any memorable way with the intended audience. By the end of this first session, we had gained an introductory understanding of the material to be studied over the course of the next 16 weeks. More importantly, however, we had cultivated compassion. And it is precisely this compassion that we as learners were tasked to bring with us into the books, voices, and stories that we were to encounter thereafter. Highlighting the virtues of differences, Brian Massengale incites, in the kingdom come, not everyone will look like you, pray like you, sing like you, or think like you. And like classrooms, congregations are collections of differences. As Massengale beautifully puts it, the baptized is the whole community who stand in unison. With the sharing of racial tensions at the outset of the educational seminar and the exposing of vulnerable stories to the ears of strangers, that very unison is established at the outset. When an upstanding, respected Black family is forced to make a midnight run to a hospital to check on the status of their admitted daughter, and in order to best ensure proper care and treatment, feel compelled to don a fine suit and a nice dress in order to offset the discrimination that their skin color unjustly exposes them to, no casual visit to the hospital for this white writer can ever be taken for granted again. Similarly, when simple elevator rides with strangers become touchstones in a discussion of racial injustice and inherent discrimination, the embeddedness of that struggle transcends the academic and permeates the casualness of everyday transactions. Another student, not the most amenable to public presentations, bravely opted to write and perform a poem which captured his own tensions with race and religion. Through stories, a community is planted with the seeds of compassion. We had established a community of vulnerability, one which invited a multitude of voices to forge dialogue about racial injustice, charging the ensuing content and subsequent learning with lived experience in the bonds of compassion. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Moves on to a discussion of forgiveness. And we say that forgiving is a letting go and a turning away. It requires the strength of facing the horrors of lynching, for example, and the fortitude of relentless compassion. In a literal sense, forgiveness has the power to cancel hate. The ironic power of the oppressed to forgive the oppressor is a power inherited by suffering. Aeschylus beautifully observed that wisdom comes through suffering. This is not meant as a call to masochism, but rather as a call to reflection and growth. We harvest wisdom from the desolation of suffering, turning the profane into something sacred. And while forgiveness thwarts hate, hate is not forgiveness's opposite. Resentment, it seems, plays that role. For it is resentment that portrays a sense of letting go, but insists, in fact, on keeping that hate at arm's distance, to be called upon and utilized later as need be. The idiom burying the hatchet is a gesture of peace between the European settlers and Native Americans, bearing an instrument of destruction as a symbol, as a symbolic promise of peace and forgiveness. Once buried, that hatchet could not be found again or retrieved, even if somebody wanted to. In effect, the violence has been lost. Country star Garth Brooks paints a picture of resentment by turning this particular idiom on its head, saying, "When it comes to forgiving, baby, there ain't no doubt. We bury the hatchet, but leave the handles sticking out." To leave the handles sticking out is a reluctance to let go, a fake burial, fake insofar as the instrument has not been buried and lost, just tucked away. Just as resentment is a sort of fake forgiveness, a tucking away, this time of hate, a way of keeping track of the debt without fully canceling. As McDermott says, my problem is not a gated community, but a gated heart where we have bars and we won't allow anyone to get to us and we won't let anyone come in. When a bone breaks, it will not heal right if it is allowed to heal. If a bone breaks, it will not grow right if it is not allowed to heal properly. Resentment is not a letting go of hate. It is the festering of hate, the festering of disease that is the opposite of healing. For the healing to begin, the hate must be let go of and turned away from. For the hate to be let go of, for forgiveness to take place and healing to begin, understanding must first take place. That is why the raising of critical consciousness is so vital in the process of healing. Talking about the pain doesn't magically make it go away, but it can build compassion and through understanding forges a path to forgiveness. It hurts to forgive just as it hurts to pour hydrogen peroxide on a knee scrape. But eventually you learn that it hurts more to allow those little pebbles of hate to fester, infect us, and poison our growth. Beautifully pragmatic. The words of Hebert Jones capture this notion perfectly. Don't see it as forgiving him. See it as forgiving yourself, as allowing yourself to be happy. What will you do with the misery that you have chosen? Can you possibly eat it? And then at the end, we sort of sum up just with a couple of final thoughts here. At the end, we look at an analysis of Gail Jones' the novel The Healing. And in that book, the character, through an act of forgiveness, has the ability then to heal other people. and to pass that healing on. And so we kind of draw out that analysis to further that. But yeah, that's the paper.
Thank you so much, Tony. Excellent work. We have about 15 minutes if we want them for questions for our panel. So I'd like to throw it to our room for anybody who would like to ask a question of our panel. As people are gathering their thoughts, I'd love to just first of all express my appreciation for everybody on this panel. What excellent research, and once again, just a panel that really illustrates the necessity and the potential of this center. And it's been such a wonderful. I haven't been here the whole day, but even just the little bit that I've seen has been just some jaw-dropping scholarship. So thank you guys so much for your work and for being here.
Can I ask Dr. Letter a question?
By all means, yes.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, I think you are rightly pointing out that what's happening here is that we're essentially using different linguistic logics and systems between folks who are desiring liberation, and then there's a different logic and system that is in operation of empire and white supremacy. So I heard you talk about, okay, so if we're faithful to our religious linguistic logic and system, then this provides us the tools to resist the language and logics of empire. Do you think it's so I like this framing of it because it says what I think we all feel, which is when we're talking to these people, we're having two different, we're using different languages. We're not even in the same conversation, or we're in the same conversation, but our language is so different. So I wonder, beyond resistance, do you think a conversation is even possible across these linguistic systems? And if not, what are the implications of that? Is the new Reformation just is new Reformation slogan just always resisting? Because how does that work out if it's not possible to have a conversation across the linguistic systems?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. One thing, I think it's even more so relying on divine logic and linguistic systems rather than my own or even our own. That it's a linguistic and logic system that has power beyond ourselves, that sometimes we tap into and sometimes we forget about, and sometimes we may not even believe in. And we leave a lot of strategy on the table when we do that. I think it's a totally different conversation when we talk about resistance to oppression and trying to build bridges or build relationships. One of the ways that I try to think about it in terms of anti-oppression, anti-oppression, is that I recognize the agency, the ability to make decisions of every human being. Some people are going to continue to make decisions that are oppressive. And one way to honor the agency of that person is just to take that seriously. That person doesn't want to be in conversation with me, doesn't want to build relationships, doesn't want to create honorable interpersonal or structural relationships with those they deem not valuable as people. So one way to think about it in terms of even moral code is that I am honoring the agency, the God-given agency in that person by letting them sit in it. That they've decided that is the decision they've decided. Now, I also believe that God opens up multitude of entry points for folks to come in and make different decisions, or to create to engage in repentance, like deep, true, honorable repentance. and not moving so quickly to this restoration, can we all get along kind of thing, that we dismiss the actual dignity of the direct targets of oppression, which is what I believe we do sometimes when we're so busy bending over backwards to accommodate folk in the name of God. Doesn't God want everybody to love everybody? That we're actually dismissing not only the agency of those persons who have decided that, but we're also claiming and proclaiming that we are willing to harm other people while folk take their time to decide if they want to be a part of restoration or not. So for me personally, this is just Michelle speaking, I'm not willing to do that. If I'm going to say that I'm going to stand on the side of whatever we put, vulnerable, direct targets of oppression, however, if we're going to say that we stand on the side of that, then my call is to stand on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hearing I mean there's a no I mean no like I think you're right. Like I think at the end of the day, like there's a sense in which like we can't have this conversation because this other side does not really value the agency of other human beings. So
and dignity and worth.
Yeah,
right?
but so I think it's interesting though that like you are kind of taking a almost like a concept of the wrath of God, right? That like instead of like this active, killing of people who do bad or something, the wrath of God is simply that sin has its consequences, so that like when people choose to be oppressors, it's we respect their agency and they therefore lose access to the full beauty of God's creation. And you're saying, I will respect your agency to do that, even if that ultimately harms even you.
I'm saying that if somebody wants to diminish their own humanity by acting
Yes.
evil and harming other people, then so be it.
Yes.
That I can't, in good conscience, say that I am actively working toward the liberation of all people while I stand behind somebody who's actively trying to oppress folk, waiting for them to come around. How many opportunities am I supposed to give them while other folk, direct targets of oppression, are being harmed and even killed? I've literally said that's okay with me as long as I can build this bridge. And I've just, again, this is just Michelle speaking. I have decided that's not for me. That I will risk whatever is going to come that way and whatever. And I don't do that perfectly. Let me be clear. I don't do that perfectly for sure. But that's a decision that I've made to honor my own agency, like to honor what I believe God might be calling me to do in the world too. So yeah, I mean,
So good. So good. Thank you. Thank you so much. I was just like, I want to ask a question and get her to talk about this. So thank you.
I really want to jump in here myself, but I'm going to leave it. Somebody else might have some more questions because this sounds so much similar to some of the work I've done and others in rhetorical circles about the whole notion of civility that I'm still, yes, and the Africana communication framework and how that kind of addresses civility. But let's just open it up, for more questions and comments. This is good. This is so good.
Yeah. Let me go ahead and bring us a question out of the chat here. I believe this is for everybody. Throughout these scholarly presentations, I heard a need of empathy as a means to address these rhetorical exigencies. Does anyone look to add empathy to the solution?
And just to throw it out real quick, there is a move to even look at empathy as being a bad thing now. This whole notion of sin of empathy. So take that for what it's worth. Talking about linguistic terrorism. Okay.
Well, if you look at the Alan Alda book, Tony, maybe you can remind me the name of it if I understood you.
Would I be looking at you like this if I understood you, I think?
And he talks about this empathy, and it's an empathy to manipulate. And it talks about this dark space of empathy. So you empathize with someone just to get them to do what you want them to do. And so that would be the wrong use of empathy. And that would be the dark side of empathy. But I do believe that the healthy side of empathy is what we should strive for. At least that's what I feel I should strive for. But it's very difficult because I think I wonder if we're conditioned or what is happening where there's one side who's willing to do any and everything for what they want. And not that I want to be like that. And then there's another side that's trying to continually be diplomatic. And I think of it as kind of somebody who's in a relationship with an abusive person, and the person is continually abusing them, and they're responding with, well, let's work it out. Let's come to the table and talk. And so I struggle with that. I don't have an answer. I struggle with it.
I think the answer is wrapped up to what Dr. Letter is talking about. It's wrapped up in agency. I mean, one of the things that I think that critical cultural scholarship has done, among the beautiful things that it's done and opened us up to new ideas and thoughts and seeing things differently, is this whole concept of agency, that we don't have it. We don't have agency. And as a rhetorical scholar, as someone who fundamentally believes that that there are decisions that we can make. They may not all be good, but we can actually make a decision. We have agency. If we ground ourselves in a fundamental belief and understanding of what it is that we believe, and this is what we know that we're going to do, and this is what we are trying to do. This is where I stand, so to speak. I think that's when we can come out, because see, the dark side of empathy is no different than, communication scholars 20 years ago, 30 years ago, talking about the dark side of communication. Interpersonal and intercultural communication scholars wrote volumes on how people were using communication as being manipulative and all of that. Empathy in and of itself, the understanding of it, is not that. But if I use that and attack it that way, and I get caught up in that sandbox of trying to argue and debate, and that's exactly what opponents want to do, is bring you to their argument and get you to just stay in that sandbox and just start making arguments that you can't get yourself out of, when you can just rise above it and just say, this is where I stand. I don't want to go over there. And quite frankly, if you're over there playing in that sandbox, I don't want you to dirty up my sandbox either. You can stay over there. That's okay. And we can move, and I can go out and try to build community with people that are more inclined to stand with me. But, I'm like Michelle now. That's just me. Oh, this is so good. This is so good. Thank y'all so much for this.
Sorry, my undergrad was in mass comm public relations, like PR. My professor was always like, PR, it's behavior modification. That's all you're doing. You're saying the thing you need, the way you need to say it to get to the outcome you need to get to. So that's like your target.
And you repeat it right over and over and just keep on going. And yeah.
Works, it works.
Other questions for our panel?
I'll just say quickly while we're waiting that I deeply appreciate what Dr. Madlock added into the chat. Whose side will you empathize with? I think that, there's, a couple of us who are like, yeah, this, because for me, that's where it comes down to as well, that empathy is a word that can be weaponized just like anything else. And that when we accept or assume the terms of that loading, by those who are seeking to oppress others, then we're giving up any kind of power that we have to resist it. And there comes a time where we have to choose. We have to choose if the two sides are incompatible, if there is no communal thriving that happens underneath the loading of that particular term or that particular reality, then those incompatible sides cannot be bridged, and you have to choose a side. And I think for some time now, the American church generally, based in white evangelical theology, has socialized Christians away from choosing a side. Anyone who believes in inclusivity has also been socialized in such a way that inclusivity is falsely equated with a generalized and unconditional permission for anything.
Right.
And that's not the case. These are different social realities that are playing out. And when they are incompatible, even Christians will have to choose.
Mhm. Well, unfortunately,
Amen.
yeah. Unfortunately, we've hit 4:15, which is the end of this panel. Thank you guys so much for everything.
Bravo.
This was an unbelievable panel. My understanding is that our next event for the conference will be at 4:30. Is that correct, Dr. Johnson?
That is correct. This would be the last panel of the day. Do you believe the day has gone by? I mean, right to near the end of this thing, and it is a panel from my good friend who submitted it. Um, Here it is. I want to get the title. On the Edge of Dangerous Rhetoric, Michael Royster. And he has a group of panelists that's going to come, and they're going to draw off of Frank Thomas's work. Mentioned Thomas earlier today in the conference. So be on the lookout for that at 4:30. So come on back for the last panel. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you all. Bye-bye.